Good morning, college football. Episode 12. Georgia State lands a superstar recruiter as its new head coach, talking college fantasy football and North Carolina with Brandon Sanders, plus news and notes from around the country after the stinger. Brandon Sanders, welcome to Good Morning College Football. How are you?
Doing good, man. Been busy in the background. New look, but same Brandon. Went a little less hair up top. I had more of the beard. I nicked it a couple weeks ago, so it's growing back. So it was a nice ratio over there for a while, but embracing the new baldness. It's been nice. Not the greatest time of year to decide to completely shave it off, but I've been enjoying it. The showers are a lot easier, and it's just easier to maintain, basically, man. But I'm doing great, man. How's things going this morning?
Doing great. We're 182 days until week 0 kicks off. And of course, for our first time watchers, listeners joining us, Campus to Canton brings us Good Morning College Football each day. If you're unfamiliar, C2C is a college fantasy football company playing that specific format of fantasy football and encompasses both college and NFL players. If you haven't already, please give this video a like. We would love if you would subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, and would love if you would consider becoming a campustocanton.com member. We've got a wide range of membership tiers, including, for as little as $2.99 a month, you get access to our Discord, find a Campus to Canton league, connect with other folks who love this game that we play, but also, of course, a wide range of data, tools, all sorts of information available through the site for all of our members. And then if you would like to dig into some of the stuff that I work on, our C2C Winning Edge tools, like our returning production database, our team profiles, which are in the works. If you are interested to upgrade to a C2C Winning Edge or all 22 tier, we, of course, would love to have you along there as well. Brandon, of course, does some great work for Campus to Canton. I believe uses some of our tools as well in some of that. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But first, Graham Coffey of the Players Lounge in Georgia. And also, there were some other reports as well, but I believe Graham was first to make the official report that former Georgia running backs coach Dell McGee is expected to become the next head coach at Georgia State. So we've probably talked a lot more about Georgia State than we expected when we started this show a couple of weeks ago. But part of that is just the calendar, how things work out, but also it's always good to note when there are coaching changes being made. And this one particularly intrigues me a bit because Dell McGee is highly regarded as one of the top recruiters in the country. He was a longtime assistant for Kirby Smart, actually one of only 2 assistants who have been with Smart from the beginning at Georgia when he took over as head coach in 2016. But McGee specifically, he was the 247 Sports top recruiter in 2018, finished multiple times in the top 20 nationally in the 247 Sports football recruiter rankings. And, as pointed out by Ben Moore of Panther Talk and 247 Sports, in his 8 seasons at Georgia, McGee was the primary or secondary recruiter for 9 5-star prospects, 28 4-star prospects, and 10 different 3-star prospects who ended up at Georgia. So Georgia State, fertile recruiting ground. Dell McGee getting his first head coaching opportunity there in Atlanta. Georgia, losing another assistant. Brandon, any initial thoughts on this news and what we might expect at Georgia State moving forward?
So Georgia State's been very relevant, especially in the past few years for CFF and purposes that way. My biggest one is with him coming in, not only is that better recruiting, and that's also a new pipeline for Georgia State. So maybe he can take a couple guys from Georgia. Of course, we know Georgia's stacked at the running back position and stuff like that. Who's to say that he might not try to pull one over if there's one that just wants playing time and they don't care about the P4 to G5 type situation. I know, and NFL, it looks like they kind of consider it a wart if you go down and you go to play at the G5 level. But I feel like if you put enough good tape on there, regardless of the university that you're at, I feel like you can still be drafted. Boise State's a good example of that for a lot of guys that came out of there. But the whole Freddie Brock versus the incoming transfer of CJ Beasley from Coastal, that will be intriguing, especially as the running backs coach is there as well. So not only already has decent guys already returning. We lost Marcus Carroll. He transferred to Missouri. And of course, Granger, who was also a pretty good rushing quarterback, is no longer there either. He graduated. So also the quarterback position is something that me being the Future Freshman podcast, I'm interested in because there's an opening at QB. So I have to check and see if they had any good recruits that are coming in for the freshmen, or if they're going to pull someone. I'm hoping in the spring for a good competition there for Georgia State. But if they could get a good one like Granger, who was standard at rushing, can get the ball down the field, man. If they can focus on the run game between Brock and Beasley, that could be very sufficient for CFF purposes. So I'm pretty excited to hear that for Georgia State. That's a win for them. And like I said, that opens up a brand new pipeline for possible candidates to come down and play a little bit further. I forget how long you would know. You're a Georgia guy there at some point. So, right down the street, I would call it. I don't know how far down the street it is, but further enough down the street where you can be like, all right, you can get some guys coming there maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And Athens is 90 minutes from Atlanta, something like that. So it's up 316 to the northeast, but plenty of Georgia recruits in the Atlanta area in years past. You mentioned the quarterback position there. Georgia State, as we've mentioned before, started its spring practices, had 2 sessions before Sean Elliott resigned. And at the quarterback position, Georgia Tech transfer Zach Gibson was expected to compete, it looked like, with Braylon Ragland, who will be a redshirt freshman. But things change. Dell McGee coming in has lots of relationships, not only at Georgia, but other players who he recruited who might have ended up somewhere else. And, when he gets on campus and evaluates what's available at the quarterback position, the running back position, which, as you touched on, is likely a strength, even though they do lose Marcus Carroll, 1,350-yard rusher, 13 touchdowns last year, big loss. But we saw what Freddie Brock could do in the bowl game. You mentioned CJ Beasley coming in from Coastal Carolina. They also added Clemson's Dominique Thomas to the mix as well. So there seem to be options at Georgia State. To me, when you hire a running backs coach, first thought is they're probably going to want to lean on the running game, give the running backs a pretty heavy workload. But you never really know, because Dell McGee has not been a recent offensive coordinator. So we're not sure exactly what the offense is going to look like specifically. I'll definitely be curious to see who he brings on as OC. But an offensive minded head coach, and do feel that this is probably, as you said, for CFF purposes, pretty good news for the Freddie Brocks, the CJ Beasleys of the world. But we'll have to see. Will this new staff be more active than the previous staff as far as bringing in guys in the spring transfer portal window? I'll be curious to see. And as you touched on, they bring in Zach Gibson and have some quarterbacks that they've recruited who are ready to compete. But is there somebody else that McGee and this new staff may throw into the mix as we get a little bit further down the line in the off season and in the preseason? A few more coaching notes here, and things can move quickly. We recorded the CFB Winning Edge podcast at 3:00 in the afternoon Wednesday, and we were talking about, we have no idea who the Georgia State head coach is, and by time it was published, I think it was pretty much a done deal that it was Dell McGee. So this note I came across earlier in the week, a UCLA offensive coordinator hot board post from Bruin Report Online mentioned Eric Bieniemy, former
Ooh.
NFL OC in multiple places, currently expected or currently should be considered the leader to be Deshaun Foster's first OC at UCLA.
Hmm.
Brennan Marion from UNLV is a name that's mentioned. And earlier this week, we talked with Andrew Katz specifically about UNLV and Marion, somebody who's been in the mix for a lot of jobs, some group of 5 head coaching jobs, plenty of power conference OC jobs. Marion's been mentioned. A longtime NFL assistant Greg Olson, who is reportedly interviewed, was also listed. Tommy Rees, Scott Frost, Sterling Gilbert, and David Shaw were mentioned as well. So first thoughts, I mean, Eric Bieniemy, you had a little bit of a reaction there. If
Yeah.
we don't know for sure yet. Maybe something happens today, and we get a name that's not listed even. But there's a lot of well-known names on this list, and I was kind of operating under the assumption that Marion maybe was toward the very top of this list, but find out earlier this week that perhaps Bieniemy is the top option right now.
I'm just intrigued that he's come down to the college level, if that makes sense. Just because he waited for so long to get under out of Andy Reid's shadow, to become his own OC, gets to Washington. I was told that he's a lot old school, he's a lot harder, so a lot of harder practices or harder on his players. But I mean, it comes down to like the mentality and stuff like that. Maybe the NFL has changed, for sure, but it's not as hard old school tackling and, as hard. So a lot of people think that maybe Eric Bieniemy is a little bit behind the times, but for so long, like, I mean, at least Washington for the most part, like what he did with Sam and as far as Sam Howell, who's another UNC quarterback, or what he had with Brissett as a backup there, like he has decent components. He had good wide receivers. He did the best with what he had there. I mean, I get it. Like they have a lot of opportunities at Washington as the Commanders in the NFL part of things, but interesting to find out that he's decided to come down to the college ranks. I guess as long as he doesn't have to, I mean, he'll have to add into the recruiting and stuff like that, but maybe he might, open up a new, pipeline there. Like we talk about, like maybe coming from the NFL that might, intrigue players and stuff like that. And maybe there's some kids these days that are just like, hey, I like the old school mentality as far as like hitting hard and, going over the middle and not being afraid, things like that. Or, having a quarterback that just will sling it. And, UCLA with a slinging quarterback, that's not a bad idea. So, we'll see how it goes if he gets the spot or not. But there's a lot of big names like Frost and a few others that are in the mix. So we'll have to see how it goes. But I'm just I'm intrigued by him wanting to come down to the college level. That's interesting.
Yeah, and Bieniemy, star at Colorado during his playing days, was mentioned in a few different cycles when the job opened out in Boulder. Didn't come together. Was as you said, on Andy Reid's staff for a long time, and considered potentially an NFL head coaching candidate at times over the last half decade or so. Currently unattached, and a lot of the coaches mentioned here, including Olson, Frost, and Shaw, currently unemployed, and so that potentially is a factor. Not sure that it would, if this opportunity came to somebody like Marion or maybe Reese, who recently moved on to a job with the Cleveland Browns, they still might have an interest. But the fact that Bieniemy and some of the others on this list are currently out of football. When an opportunity pops up, they're fewer and farther between right now this time of the year than elsewhere. So if Bieniemy specifically, or one of these other guys, if they end up being the hire, take the job, it's either maybe sit out a year or take the UCLA OC job. So curious to see how it all plays out, and hopefully we'll find out something soon. But a few other notes, some coaching notes here. Pete Thamel yesterday reported that Western Michigan has hired its next defensive coordinator. It's going to be an internal hire, promoting linebacker coach Scott Power to replace Lou Esposito. Power has been a defensive coordinator for well over a decade in his career, so definitely has a lot of experience. Was a 2-year DC at Louisiana Tech most recently. Want to touch on a little bit of an under the radar move at Kansas late last week. The offensive line job at Kansas came open. John Bryce of Football Scoop reported that Scott Fuchs was going to be taking an offensive assistant role with the Tennessee Titans. And, Kansas has been a program on the rise, but recently lost its offensive coordinator to Penn State. Offensive coordinators and offensive line coaches are usually, very connected to one another, and Kansas brought in Jeff Grimes as its co-OC, who does have an offensive line background. So not necessarily a huge surprise that Fuchs was going to be moving on. But according to ESPN, the Jayhawks are expected to hire Daryl Akpalsa and my apologies for butchering that name, I'm sure, from Northern Illinois, but previously has ties to Kansas head coach Lance Leopold, had worked together at Wisconsin Whitewater and Buffalo. So though it's not, total continuity there, if you're looking at the Kansas, specifically running back situation, I mean, Devin Neal, one of the top players in the country, in my opinion, at the running back position, looking ahead to 2024. And Lance Leopold's had so much success producing, just very productive running backs. And a big part of that has been the consistency they've had at offensive coordinator and the offensive line. So this, we don't talk a whole lot of O-line coaching changes, coaching news, but this one definitely did catch my eye sort of as it was playing out, and the fact that Kansas going back to a relationship where there's a little more consistency there. But so what I'm curious, because I remember, this time last year there were opinions that ranged quite a bit on Devin Neal at Kansas, and whether or not we would see a very heavy workload for him, whether there would be some split with Daniel Hishaw, who has been productive in a little bit of a smaller sample, but certainly, quality running back there as well. They did have Dylan McDuffie also. He has since moved on. But what are your thoughts specifically on Devin Neal, and does this change in offensive coordinator at Kansas and perhaps, the O-line coaching situation, moving to Jeff Grimes as play caller? Does that impact your thoughts on Devin Neal? Does that impact how you see this perhaps as a workload share in that backfield?
Not entirely. I would be more concerned about, now that Bean's gone, we still have Daniels as the quarterback. He's a rushing, friendly quarterback as well. So I'd be more like, how much is Daniels going to get with Devin Neal? I know you and me both are Devin Neal fans. I know in the offseason a couple seasons ago we were trying to get a deal done, but I think you were just too high on Neal to my liking. So but needless to say, we both were Neal fans, so that's says a lot about Devin Neal. I just think as far as if you're looking at a C2C aspect, like he's a guy that I would be very excited about next year coming out. If he does, he'd be one of those guys that adds to that running back crop, whereas this year the key is like wide receivers, QB heavy as far as the NFL draft this year, but the next year, all the running backs are supposed to be coming out finally. So you have Judkins and Henderson and all these guys that are coming out. Devin Neal could be one of those guys that'll be right up at the top there. So if you're a C2C player, Devin Neal would be a guy like you would want to have, because he could easily move over to an NFL roster. And I think he would have whether he's a change of pace or he eventually just replaces a running back that's a contract. We've seen it, both now in college and the NFL, where the running back position is kind of calmed down quite a bit to where like they don't see the aspect of paying someone over $12 million for a running back. They'll just replace you with a rookie. So that's that's a good opportunity for Devin Neal to get into an organization here. But as Kansas, I like the having with Leopold having the connection there. I think that's going to kind of help out quite a bit, if that makes sense. Like if this was a guy out of the streets like Leopold or the rest of the squad didn't know, I would probably be a little concerned. Also, to plug the C2C winning edge, I know you did something in the chat there as far as returning O-line and things like that in particular as well. If you hop onto that subscription, you would be able to kind of see maybe how that affects as far as the data and stuff like that. But for me personally, I don't see too much of a change, and I still, I'm 2 thumbs up on Devin Neal. Like I don't really have a hesitation right there right now. So.
Gotcha. And a little bit of somewhat breaking news. Got a text from Xavier Trish, co-host of the CFP Winning Edge podcast and a Georgia State alum, who passed along a tweet from Matt Zenitz of 247 Sports that says, an update on the Georgia State head coaching search. The job hasn't been offered yet, and there are at least a few in-person interviews set for today. Sources tell 247 Sports tomorrow has continued to be the target for making a hire. I should have mentioned earlier that Seth Emerson and Bruce Feldman of The Athletic reported on Wednesday that Buster Faulkner, the current offensive coordinator at Georgia Tech, was a strong candidate, as was Texas A&M running back coach Trooper Taylor. I saw something from Football Scoop that said Taylor was expected to interview in person as well. So perhaps this isn't the done deal that it sounded like as we were discussing in the first little bit of our show here today, but something definitely to keep an eye on. A couple of other quick notes. From Wednesday, we mentioned Marcus Bryant, starting left tackle at SMU, entered the transfer portal and talked kind of at length about how I expected he would be one of the most highly sought after transfers in the country, but as I, do for a good chunk of my day, was trying to read up on different news and information pieces, and came across a SMU spring football outlook on the offensive line by Jordan Hofeditz of On the Pony Express, the On3 site that covers SMU, that mentioned, and this was prior to the news that Bryant was going to be moving on, mentioned him as, quote, someone who might have to battle to keep his job. So SMU was pretty active in the offensive line transfer portal, brought in some players from Power 5 programs, highly recruited out of high school, and even though Hofeditz mentioned that or did project Bryant to start, which he's been a 3-year starter, certainly that you would expect he would continue into his 4th season as a full-time starter, and part of 5 seasons he's made at least one start had he continued into this year. But I was speculating, talking about some of those numbers you mentioned, and the C2C Winning Edge and the lower numbers of offensive line snaps and starts returning and things of that nature. And teams like Michigan are on that list. Teams like North Carolina, as we'll discuss, were on that list. Would the Ohio States and the Alabamas of the world be interested in a player like Marcus Bryant? And I still think that that's probably the case. I mean, his experience level is just, it would be a huge asset to almost anyone. But it is worth noting that the folks who are the closest to the SMU program, at least, in this one piece, didn't necessarily say it was a slam dunk that Bryant was going to be able to hold that job the entire year. And it is difficult to project offensive lines at some point. So did just want to follow up that in case my speculation was a little too much too soon. And final note before we discuss a little bit more CFF, I find it interesting when there are 2-sport athletes, especially at the collegiate level. And Colorado running back Dylan Edwards is one. According to CBS Colorado Sports' Richie Cozzolino, Edwards ran a 6.92 in the 60-yard dash in his first track meet with the Buffs track team. Helped him reach the finals in that meet. I'm not a track aficionado and don't know all the what necessarily is a great time, but I do know that Dylan Edwards showed some speed as a true freshman at Colorado last year. And, we mentioned guys like Zachariah Branch who are running track, Deuce Robinson, both of those players at USC, playing baseball, Deuce Robinson, this year. There are, a few other college football players, and track seems to be the most common, maybe the most flexible as far as being able to participate in things like spring practice and whatnot. But did just, find that interesting as well. But Brandon, you are here with us today. And of course, you're a CFF expert. You've been doing this for a long time. Wanted to discuss with you, how did you get started in CFF? What are you working on these days? And then we'll talk a little bit about a mock draft that you were part of recently as well.
Sure. Let's start with the origin. Some people know. I keep it in my bio on Twitter in case people want to know like where I've been, things like that in particular. But pretty much was a kid that was just Denver Broncos only, just a John Elway guy. Won the Super Bowls. Came into hard times with the Jay Cutlers of the world, and different things like that, the Kyle Ortons and all that good stuff. So while I was waiting patiently for a good starting quarterback and good talent around us basically, and a decent defense, well, I think it was like I came in a little later than what people think. Mine was like 2010 was my origin story, so it hadn't been too long. It's like 14 years total. So I was working in retail. A guy was like, like you can play this game where like you can cheer on other players and other teams and stuff like that if you want to. It's like, all right, cool. What is it? It's like it's fantasy football. So I was like, all right. So that's when the the Matthew Berrys of the world and those that were out there, ESPN, things like that, Yahoo, those guys that are still doing it. I wasn't like in the weeds just yet, but then I started learning like how you get the points and different things like that. Started, your standard leagues or redrafts, and then you'd work into PPR or points per reception and stuff like that. So you work your way up there as well. And like when I was in high school, I enjoyed, essays. I was a big history buff, so I liked, talking about the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, stuff like that. But I enjoyed writing, whether it's a survey or whatever the MLA format or whatever it was called back then as well. I forgot what it's called, but basically, like I enjoyed writing a paper too. So I enjoyed writing. And it's funny how that's transitioned now to I'd rather just podcast and talk about it versus writing like 5 whole pages of that one. But if I had to, I can write, I guess, a manifesto if you want me to. But so I kind of was like, well, there's guys out there that is actually like, and I didn't know you could, get paid for this when I started. I did it for free, but like there was like the Fantasy Footballers, the podcast is pretty popular there as well. They were doing redraft only at the time, but they're looking for their first set of writers. I had done a piece about, of all people, Sterling Shepard, who didn't really pan out in the NFL. However, my buddy Nate Marquise will be happy to hear, like I was big in him in Oklahoma. This is before CFF, before I even knew that was a thing. But I was just excited about his breakout potential. So I wrote about him as a possible breakout as a freshman, or excuse me, as a rookie, and decided to turn it in. They loved it. So they hired me on. Then I got transitioned to DFS. So I learned how to play DFS pretty quickly. So kind of like the way of like what Katz did at first, like he was more DFS before season. That's where I started doing that for the NFL, and then started getting into my home leagues, which I still have a home league like that started literally like 2012 or something like that we still do with a group of our family. So a lot of bragging rights, money, and a good championship trophy involved there. So there's still a lot of smack talk there as well. So I still play that, even though like redraft to me is like an everyday thing, if that makes sense. Like it's not as challenging as the stuff that we're into nowadays. But then I learned about the world of Dynasty, and at the time the fantasy footballers weren't there, so I became not as motivated. So I told them I would want to look for other spots possibly that do Dynasty. Of course, there's the guys at Dynasty Nerds that's been around for a good time as well. They were doing Dynasty, and that was the first time I got a chance to really like dive in deep, to the point to where like the fantasy footballers, our first guys, we made our own league. We learned how to play Dynasty together. And so as we were learning, Dynasty Nerds was available and they wanted me to do it. So I wrote a breakout about DJ Moore as a rookie prospect, and that turned out to be in my favor. So got a little bit of notoriety for hitting on DJ Moore. And when I was, we did the rookie profiles for redraft, and I hit on Alvin Kamara there at Tennessee, who had fresh legs, things like that in particular. So like, I hit on a few players that people are like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. Lucky me, I guess, because I just picked out the players I liked, and did that. So I was doing Dynasty Nerds, and then I was like, I just really wanted to get better about, the eye test and making sure that I'm like picking out good players I could add to my dynasty. I was like, there's got to be a way that I can focus more on college football and kind of go from there. So I came in not as long. So like hearing the origin stories, like my buddy Mitch Hart, who did it like for years without like on spreadsheets. My friend John Lobb, who is the OG and the guy that I looked up to, because when someone told me that I could play college fantasy football, he was the first name to ever pop up, and started following his stuff. So the Gridiron Scholar, Mitch Hart, those guys, the fact that they did it way before Cats, K, who was doing, like DFS. I remember playing, I don't know if you did it, but when FanDuel were playing sketchy NCAA DFS before it was legal, and then they had to take it down there temporarily. Like all I knew how to do was like, I know who this North Carolina player is. I know who this guy is from NC State. So I just played a bunch of ACC guys, would hit every once in a while, but it was never really good where I was decently in NFL. So I started learning about that. Luckily, I got in my first draft. It was randomized. I was the lucky guy that won the incumbent of Lamar Jackson at Louisville, who drops about 50 points a game there in the ACC. This is like right after Teddy Bridgewater had gone to Minnesota Vikings. This was like prime Lamar Jackson. So I got in when the getting was good. I think that was like 2015, 2016. So I've really only been doing this maybe, I would say 10, maybe less than 10 years now in the CFF industry, but I got hooked, man. Like it was, you go from 32 teams and starting to figure stuff out a little easier. Now, there's stuff you can look into. We'll talk about the stuff I'm into and the behind the scenes and things like that when I'm not doing the podcast. But now you're going, at the time was 130. Now we're up to 134. So just learning about different offenses, schemes, opportunities, things like that. It really just hooked me, man. Like the fact that I could be able to play, if I want to play a Tar Heels player, I can type situation. Or if I want to play a guy on Duke and I want to, barf in my mouth, but I'm enjoying, the points, the fantasy points. It is what it is. It's like, yeah, it didn't literally like Riley Leonard, but hey, in a redraft, you play him. It's just what it is. So that's what kind of got me into it. So playing and then starting to learn it and things like that. And then finally, I decided to start my own. That's where the CFF University comes from. I did my own little Patreon. It was very novice. It's very much like how to play type situation. And some of the one article I have done for C2C was the intro 1-to-1 how to play CFF, which I think is nice and evergreen. I'll go in there every couple months and change a few things to try to keep it relevant so people can still access that. Just like when we have like a podcast like how to play C2C or an article how do you play C2C, I wanted that on the website so people can just kind of hop in and play CFF whenever they wanted to. So I think the next one I'd probably write is like another evergreen how to play CFF Dynasty. Luckily, we have good podcasts now, like Defending the Natty with Chasing Natty. So we have Nate, who's taking more of a podcasting role, which I enjoy seeing him do as well. With Jared, who's our fearless leader. So I enjoy seeing that development. And then started my podcast a couple of years ago. I just wanted to take a niche out of the CFF in particular and kind of focus that, because everyone was going in with just like, they were just looking at 24/7 and stuff like that. I mean, finally your stuff came out. So it was good to see like VGR Plus and things like that. And we can talk about some of that too and how I integrate that later. But, just being able to focus on freshman and supplemental drafts and like having the opportunities and having people be a little bit more, comfortable with that, or, just being able to kind of distinguish who's around one guy, who's around 5, round 6 type situation, just by talking it out with guests and stuff like that, or on my own, or going to a spring game or whatever the case may be. I wanted to really just dig out my own area, and I wanted to bring that to C2C. So finally I brought the podcast. I, packed up the novice one, joined Campus to Canton, and been here for the past couple of years. So I've been enjoying it pretty thoroughly, man. So that's been my journey. Sorry it was long winded, but I wanted to tell people that, hey, I've done NFL, I've done CFF, I've done both at the same time. So I mean, like you can start from 32 teams and work your way up to 134. I promise. Just like Katz in his episode, like there's always the but what about this? What about this? Like I started with just my conference, like CFF. Like I did you and me both in the ACC best ball. We were both now defending champions. I know you were the year before.
You finally knocked me off my perch. I had back-to-back wins.
Man, you called it out. You said I had a good roster. So thank you for that. So you saw it early. But yeah, like I started ACC and just learning my division and learning my conference and stuff like that, and the players and the depth charts. And then I worked my way up. All right, let's look at SEC. Now let's look at rest in peace Pac-12. So now we're in a P4 situation. So that's honestly how I started, and so there's plenty of articles, there's plenty of content out there, including this channel in particular, where you can go and really access this and still get a broader picture of CFF, and then helping you, if you do play C2C, where that helps you transition over to getting them to play in the pro level and stuff like that. So those excuses are out the windows nowadays. Now I'm just trying to make it nationalized, man. So we'll see how it goes.
For sure. Yeah, no, and I mean, anybody who pays any attention to my podcast or has watched this show for the first 12 episodes know that I can be long-winded. So I think they're prepared, and CFF folks, we have a lot to say. There's a lot of information to digest, and to hit on a couple of things that you brought up, I think are particularly interesting. One of the things that I think that doing this show in particular, I'm going to enjoy because, there are definitely periods. We're in late February. There are periods that we're going to be kind of, lacking in some of the major news. It just so happens that we had kind of an unexpected head coaching job open up, that there's still some, coordinator jobs opening up and things like that. And that's definitely going to take up space in what we discuss. Want to highlight a team per day. That's going to take up some space, of course. But I think that, doing this every day or just about every day for the next however many months until the season kicks off, 182 days. Is that what we said earlier? Trying to keep that countdown going. There's going to be time, I think, to dig into process specifically, dig into some of the, why we work on the things that we do, what kind of sparks interest, and how we can learn. And you mentioned two things that stuck out to me. You started CFF, and it sounded like in part because it's hard. Like you wanted more. You wanted to be able to dig into more, and I know Felix Sharp, who is very vocal about wanting to grow the game of college fantasy football, wanting to grow C2C as a format. For some folks, the fact that CFF is more difficult in some ways, in part just because the information. It's 4 times as many teams to deal with, more than 4 times as many teams. That can be intimidating to folks coming in, but it also can be a very fun challenge for folks who are interested in taking that next step, digging into information a lot more. And the other thing that you brought up, which I thought was particularly interesting, is you did take that next challenge, but it sounded like one of the things that perhaps made it a little bit more of a smooth transition was that you focus specifically on your favorite team, North Carolina, your conference that you were most familiar with, perhaps the ACC. So one thing that interests me as well that I hope to dig into a little bit is this idea of, you can be a generalist, right? And even though college football is basically the only sport I pay a ton of attention to.
True.
You can know a little bit about all 134 teams, and I feel like the work I do is very, very helpful because building team pages and information for all 134 teams, pulling information from other sources and sort of adding a little bit of a different layer to it is one of the things that we try to do. That's helpful. Like I feel like I have probably a better grasp of the bottom 25 teams that maybe the average college football fan, but turn that around, and sometimes I think it's really possible that I don't have as good of a grasp on maybe the top 25 teams. There are folks who are so are huge Alabama fans, huge Ohio State fans. So I'm never going to know as much as them, but sometimes I think I need to maybe dig a little bit more into that side of things. Like I shouldn't necessarily have the same amount of knowledge as about UTEP as I do Ohio State. I don't know if that makes sense. There are some benefits, but then also there are some areas where I feel like, man, I really do need to dig into things a little bit more. And sometimes I have a little bit of a coaching background. I think about in the off season, sometimes I want to do a project where I dig into a little bit more of X's and O's because I just haven't really flexed that muscle very much recently. And should I focus on, one particular team or one particular style of offense? Anyway, we can get into all that another day. But I thought it was interesting, kind of your journey as you discussed. Got into CFF a little bit because there was so much more to do, but also took a step to make it a little bit more manageable and kind of smooth that transition a little bit by focusing on your favorite teams and the conference you are most familiar with. I do want to ask you about the recent mock that you participated in, same mock that Andrew Katz was part of that we discussed earlier this week. And I know Jared is constantly going in with mocks.
Yeah, he's got a few in the pipe right now, so the ADP is growing, which is fantastic for CFF. Projects, we'll talk about projects at the end, but having weekly CFF and ADP is very helpful as far as data in the background, and that could grow to help us as far as making better selections and for breakouts things. We'll talk about that a little bit later as far as what we're working on. I know I bugged you a couple days ago about some stuff, but I found out, I went through Jarek and then through Tim, so I found out what I was actually looking for, but the projections help quite a bit and will help us grow the CFF space, as far as what we can look at as far as charts and things like that, to where we can find those breakouts and things like that. So shout out to Jared for just doing the Lord's work half the time. So, and you as well, sir.
Well, no, we've got a great team, and everybody kind of dives into the things that they're most passionate about, and I think it all kind of works together. But this mock is about a little over a week old now, and
about a week and a half now at this point. This is before certain coach changes and stuff like that, so that might change a little bit in the newer ADP and things like that. But
I think it was before Chip Kelly was officially gone, things like that. But you were drafting out of the fourth. Right, exactly. Yeah, you were drafting out of the fourth spot. Took Tet McMillan first. I'm just going to run down your picks here real quick. Haynes King, Georgia Tech quarterback, was the 21st pick, second round. Then you took Jalen White, running back out of Georgia Southern, in the third. Then Brennan Presley in the fourth, wide receiver from Oklahoma State. A couple of running backs, LaQuint Allen from Syracuse, Jaquavius Marks transfer to USC. You paired Haynes King with one of his top quarterbacks, freshman breakout last year, Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. Pretty intriguing quarterback to me in the 8th round, Miller Moss from USC. You took Dalvin Smith, who is listed in this as a tight end, which we don't have to completely hash that out, but I am on the side of Dalvin Smith should not be considered a tight end in CFF this year. But running back Jaheim White, another freshman breakout last year at West Virginia. Wide receiver Cam Camper, transferred to Boise State, so another intriguing transfer there. Max Johnson, quarterback from North Carolina, who, as we'll discuss a little bit later, how are the Tar Heels going to replace Drake Maye? Seems like Max Johnson is next man up. You took his brother, tight end Jake Johnson, 2 rounds later. So that's the second kind of, quarterback receiver, good connections.
Of the pick.
Homer pick, but also
important. We'll talk about it.
Sure. Running back Quali Conley was the part of that sandwich between the Johnsons there in round 13. In round 15, you took NC State wide receiver Noah Rogers, transfer from Ohio State. I know somebody that you are high on this year. And then your last pick in round 16, you took a wide receiver out of Liberty, Treon Sibley. So curious, what your strategy was going in. Do you treat a mock draft like, hey, this is my team, even though it's not going to be a team that counts necessarily? Are you focused on, creating the best ADP you can? Are you not wanting to tip your hand a little too much? Or are you, it looks like, knowing some of the guys that you've mentioned before as being some of your favorites, wanting to shine a light on maybe some players that are a little under the radar right now?
Right. Yeah. My strategy is like the first 10 rounds, I definitely want to be ADP strategic, because I want I want there to be good data. Like, so I want a good ADP. Like, this isn't just for me. Like, I'll have my team. And that's why I took the guys in the back, because those are my flag plants. Those are guys that I want to bring to the light where I feel that they're not getting enough love. If they move up in ADP, that's fine. I'll find another sleeper. It'll be okay. But at the same time, like, I'm looking in the first 10 rounds to be very specific as far as like trying to find really good ADP. So then that translates over to the website and stuff like that. And for those that are getting to CFF for the first time, then I start calling my shots. And that's where it's like, all right, Cam Camper, I'm big on him, going with Malachi and going with Ashton Genty. That trio, I'm really intrigued by Boise State this year. And then I start, I had to take at least one homer pick. We'll talk about UNC later, but there's a clear distinction at the moment before the spring practices get in full shape right now. Right now, there's just practices, but Max Johnson is the go-to right now. And then I wanted to, shine the light. Like, I'm not going to back off on Coley Conley. I get it that Arizona has two really good running backs, but with their the coach that they have there, I feel like both of them will have quite a role. Even Conley being the backup to Kyrie Robinson at San Jose, I know it's a jump up in competition from G5 to P4, but I think Coley Conley is very much a guy that, even if he's considered an RB B2 or 1A or 1B or whatever the case may be, I feel like he's still going to carve out a good role, especially with Jonah Coleman going to Washington. Coleman's another guy I just couldn't get my hands on in this one, but I'm really big on Jonah Coleman there at Washington this year. And then Jake Johnson, because of, I don't know. I was told Nesbitt's gone. I haven't seen him in any of the Shrine games or he's not a senior, so he was that one. But from what the reports was he's gone. However, I haven't seen him gone to the combine or anything like that. So I don't know if he's returning or not. But if he doesn't, Jake Johnson with a Freddie Kitchens tight end coach and the way that they want to run things with Max, that's a good combo right there. So I'll let you. I know you're a big Nesbitt guy too. So, and he had a bit of a falling out, but came back strong though. So last year. So.
Yeah. No, so Bryson Nesbitt is back as far as I can tell. So I was a little surprised that he
I saw he declared at first.
Let's see here. So he is listed on the 2024 roster currently.
Perfect.
And I was a little surprised, because he's somebody that, as you said, got off to a little bit of a slow start, but came on strong. There was, I know, some concern in the CFF community that Chip Lindsey, is the offensive coordinator last year, didn't feature the tight end. But Bryson Nesbitt is kind of one of those hybrid guys a bit. I mean, 6'5", 230 in that range. Very, very athletic tight end. Operates a lot like a big receiver for the most part. And with Tez Johnson being limited, being unavailable for a good chunk of the season, Nesbitt's skill set, I think, was helpful in helping to replace some of that production that was lost with Walker's unfortunate situation. But he's somebody that it seemed like the NFL might have been even a little higher on him than kind of what his role could be in college football. So I was a little bit surprised that we didn't see him officially declare, and it was a little bit of a unknown for a bit. But as of no news is good news, I guess, from a college standpoint. Didn't see that thank you Chapel Hill post on Twitter or anything, and as you said, wasn't part of any of the All-Star games. So
we'll talk a little bit more about Lindsey and the rest and why that might be the case this year. We'll talk a little bit more, but it's good to know. I mean, if that's the case, I probably would have let if this was longer than 16 rounds, then Jake Johnson would have probably fell down. Now that I know that Nesbitt's back. So that'd be the case there. Noah Rogers, I want to shine a light on. So here's my thing, and no offense to my buddy Matthew Bruning, who I go to everything to Ohio State with. Why would I not? He's the man when it comes to that stuff. But I feel like Noah Rogers was pressured too much by his peers to come to Ohio State. There was a big recruitment thing. He was going to, regardless of, he said no to UNC. I get it, because at the time, we had Andre Green, we have all these. It was a crowded wide receiver room, and then we had the guys coming in as far as McCollum and Tez. So it's like he felt like it was too crowded, and he wanted to originally go to NC State. Well, I've seen Noah Rogers up close and personal. He's taken on guys like Juice Vereen, who went to High Block High School. That's only like 20 minutes down the road from where I live. So I was able to kind of see the tight end / wide receiver prospect flourish, but I've also got to see really good North Carolina high school football. And one of them being the highest recruit as a 4-star was Noah Rogers. And the kid can absolutely play. And honestly, coming from, the Big Ten, not being able to play because there's just so much talent in front of him, to be in NC State where they look, I love KC, Kevin Concepcion. I think he's still going to be an asset. So I'm not saying don't take KC first. You should in the earlier rounds. But I'm saying people are sleeping on Noah Rogers. They need to pay a lot more attention to him because of the pedigree, because of his skill set and what he's capable of doing. Yes, I'm the Future Freshman podcast guy. I'm the freshman guy. But at the same time, like, I've got to see him up close. I got to see his tangibles. I've seen what he's capable of. And in the ACC, like, that's defense dependent. You know what I'm saying? Like, it depends on which team wants to play defense that day. So there's a lot more opportunity to go, especially with him. Jolly coming in. That's unfortunate for Juice Vereen, who's my boy. So hopefully Vereen will just have to kind of sit another year and develop while Jolly kind of takes his space there at NC State. And I'm a big fan of Grayson McCall coming to NC State. So I like my rivals down the road there in Raleigh. They got a good setup. Shout out to Chris Moxley, who's literally 5 minutes away from Carter Fickley. So he gets to just walk whenever he wants to and see it. So maybe I'll get to hang out with him if I can catch the NC State spring game, as long as it's not on the same day as Carolina's, because I'm a annual spring game goer for UNC because I want to see what they roll out in offense and defense firsthand, when it first starts after the practices. I want to be there and be able to report it, so then people can kind of just make their decisions from there, and that's the most important thing there. Last but not least, because of the returning production of CFP Winning Edge, you and me, I found out our CJ Daniels guys together. I was big on CJ Daniels as a freshman. Unfortunately, he got injured. I was not patient, and I left him off my dynasty roster. Someone else picked him up. And then, our good old Caden Salter comes in town. And I was noticing Caden Salter is going very high. But who is he throwing it to other than, Henshaw, the tight end, right? So I was looking at Treon Sibley. Like, he's got, what was it? 11.7% of the target share that came, whereas the 29 came out of CJ Daniels. He's gone to LSU, right? And then you have 3 graduate transfers out. So other than Henshaw, unless they have a transfer coming in that you may be aware of, or someone in the spring might come in, which if you're a wide receiver and you're looking for an opportunity to shine in Chadwell's system, I'd be looking at Liberty. I know, like, it's different. They're a Christian college, so I don't know, like, if you have to have a certain degree to get in or whatever the case may be, but it's made people like, CJ Daniels, Pop Douglas now, who's in the NFL, Willis, who didn't really, he's a backup now, but he did really good for CFF purposes for us as far as being a good mobile quarterback. So if Salter's going to sling it in a Chadwell system, Treon Sibley is the guy right now, and people are not talking about him. So I wanted to bring it to light and be like, this is a guy that should probably be well above. If you're looking at Salter in the first round, who's his top target? It's right now, it's Treon Sibley. So for 16 round, I thought that was a steal, but more so I wanted to be brought in the light. And I said something on Twitter, and then I saw the replies of, the memes of people writing stuff down and stuff like that. So people are going to probably pay attention. So Sibley will probably go higher as long as there's no big transfer coming in. But if you're a P4 wide receiver and you're a beast and you're just buried in a depth chart, man, why not pull a Cam Camper? Why not pull one of those guys where they go to a G5 system and really just ball out? Because actually you can see Liberty people get drafted, man. So for C2C purposes, this is also a guy I would pick up on waivers if you're in a C2C league as well, man. So best of both worlds.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned some of the returning production work that we do. And when I was talking to Andrew Katz earlier this week, we discussed those conference-only drafts, like the ACC draft you dominated this past year. And one of the things that's helpful is just sort of having a working knowledge, or being able to quickly refer to, okay, what are the situations where there really is kind of a wide open opportunity for a player to step up, whether it's like a Treon Sibley to step into a situation where CJ Daniels was targeted 82 times, averaged 19.5 yards per catch, had 10 touchdowns last year, over 1,000 yards. And Treon Sibley was a big play receiver as well, had over 20 yards per catch. But knows the system and perhaps might be able to step up and take over a big percentage of that vacated production. CJ Daniels transferring out to LSU, but also knowing as you hit on a couple of the other transfer receivers, guys moving around and in a couple of cases or Cam Camper specifically, moving from Indiana to Boise State, where we know the situation has changed there quite a bit with Malachi Nelson taking over as quarterback, most likely. So it's really, really interesting, looking through your draft. And I took part. I've only been in one mock so far this
You
year.
did the first one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you did it way too early. Nice.
Right. And talked to Jared
Always fun.
About that, sort of my strategy going in a little bit when he had me on chasing the Natty around that same time. And at least at this very, very early stage, I am maybe too cautious on transfer receivers. I did take CJ Daniels just because I really liked what I saw out of him at Liberty, but then also LSU. I mean, losing 2 likely first round NFL draft picks, there's an opportunity for him to step in.
How do you just to throw it off the rails here for a second? I'm a CJ Daniels guy, but I'm big on Kyron Lacey. He's the senior that's coming back, that's been in the system. Do you think the change in quarterback changes things? Do you think it's same old LSU and we're just moving up the scale? Kyron's the new neighbors. What's your process? I love CJ Daniels. I think he fits right in, and honestly, I like him over Xavier Thomas, who also transferred in too. So, if I had to guess, it would be Lacey, Daniels, Thomas for me, basically.
Part of the reason I am as cautious at this early stage about transfers is because in a situation like that, honestly, I haven't fully made up my mind. I just know there were times last year. I'm pretty big on, if I'm watching a game and a player makes me audibly say, wow, I try to file that away, whether I write it down or just file it away somewhere in my brain. And CJ Daniels is a player that made me say wow a couple of times.
That was Noah Rogers for me last year, by the way. So
sure. And there's not really any number attached to that. And over the course of the off season and working through the team profiles and things like that, I will, by doing that work, start to build a little bit more of my own opinion on how I see things shaking out. It's a little too early for that for me. And that's probably why I'm at this point a little too hesitant. Sometimes I can go too far in that direction of like, oh yeah, I see this opportunity. So this guy is next man up. He's going to step in and dominate because it's the same role, same offense. And sometimes that works great. Sometimes, the guy who is a first round NFL draft pick and had, crazy stats, they're just a great player. And so they're, you're not really going to replace them as well. And perhaps not to cut our CFF discussion, too early, but I do want to make sure we save some time to talk about North Carolina. We'll have to have you on another time and get a little bit more CFF talk, and definitely as you start to have, following the spring game, following more of your work with the Future Freshman pod. I know you are big on big fish, small pond, kind of a pioneer of finding those situations. So definitely, I
found my first quarterback thanks to returning production. So, like I said, CQC winning edge, hit that up.
Thank you for that. But yeah, we'll definitely want to pick your brain on G5 players who've got a big opportunity. Maybe a little bit later as we start looking ahead toward freshman supplemental drafts and things like that. But you are a North Carolina guy, as you mentioned. You've got plans to go to the spring game, and talking about a great talented player who is moving on and creating an opportunity for somebody to step in and potentially be in a great spot to be highly productive. But also, is it just that Drake Maye is such a good player? Is Max Johnson going to be able to step in and that be a seamless transition? Will or are we forgetting about Connor Harrell, who had an opportunity to lead this team through bowl practices and got the start against West Virginia in the Duke's Mayo Bowl? What are your thoughts specifically on the quarterback situation? I mean, you took Max Johnson, so I'm assuming you feel he's the guy to beat there. But is Max Johnson going to be somebody who's going to step in and be able to replicate or come close to the type of production we saw from Drake Maye? Or is he really going to have to worry about a guy like Connor Harrell, who is going to be returning as a third-year sophomore.
So I could talk about UNC all day. So just, I'll try to keep it as short and sweet as I can, but, just stop me when you're like, I've had enough of UNC talk. But so I have feet on the ground, or I have boots on the ground in UNC. I have my tie-ins. I have people I can go to. Some write for Inside Carolina. Some are just there as like equipment managers or someone that's within the building there at Chapel Hill. So I won't give away names or anything like that. I just want to keep their personal lives, so people aren't hitting them up like I do, or we have just general conversations. But we become friends. It was more so like, hey, business to business. But over time, I've become friends with these people. So it's just more of a general conversation. So the way to put it is Connor Harrell, which I love. I still have him on my dynasty roster. However, he had his time, like from the inside looking out, like he had the bowl game and he did okay in performance. However, it wasn't a mind blowing or like, oh man, he really like broke out, if that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right after they brought Max Johnson in. At the time, that was going to be or consider a straight up QB battle. Like Max Johnson's played in the SEC, so he's veteran a little bit. Like he's had some decent production. I think before Texas A&M when he was, what was it, LSU?
Yeah,
or something like that. LSU. He had a 2,000 yard performance, and then he just he got outbeat. It is what it is. So Max Johnson is like, he's considered not as so much as a savior as a bridge. So like when he comes in, like now with Harrell not doing as great as he did in the bowl game, now there's a true competition where Max Johnson currently has the lead. Now I'll go ahead and tell you Max Johnson is the bridge, so he might be the starter. However, if Connor Harrell does really great in the spring, he does good in the spring game, or if we just see, he starts better himself in practice and Max Johnson starts to struggle, I wouldn't be supposed to where we might see a change in the guard type situation, because Harrell does come from the Tua and all those guys. Their dad was the one that developed him as far as like the coach and his feet and stuff like that. So Connor Harrell is really explosive about getting out of the pocket and stuff like that. However, I think with Chip Lindsey in there, and we can talk about him here in a minute or so, but he's looking for someone that will stay in the pocket and only get out and climb out when they need to. And they're looking at Max as like a replacement. So I still feel like we need, and I'm considering him more the bait. They wanted Jake Johnson. That's who they really wanted, because at the time Nesbitt was declaring. So Jake Johnson is a high 4, almost 5-star tight end. He's an absolute monster. He just was buried under A&M and the multitude of NIL that they have and stuff like that. So bringing Max in was the bait to bring in Jake. So now we have two really, really good tight ends at the same where what if they play 2 tight end sets? Freddie Kitchens is still our tight ends coach. This is the first year. And I told people this last year, and I don't know if they truly believe me, but until I heard the game when we were playing Minnesota and we were just blowing them out, the Minnesota game is like Drake Maye literally interviewed Chip Lindsey. This was Drake Maye's offense last year. Like him and Mac Brown, that was their offense. So like what they ran is what Drake wanted, because he didn't want to overdo his arm because he was preparing for the NFL draft. And a lot of people are like, I get it. Jaden Daniels is more of a Lamar Jackson type. So NFL prospects and stuff like that, they want someone that can rush. And in NFL fantasy, that's what you want. That's more points, all that good stuff. So I get the Jaden Daniels, and he's the Heisman now. So it's like, the recency bias. I'm not saying it's biased, but like Jaden Daniels is far and away different from when he was at Arizona State. There's a clear difference in tape and stuff like that where he's developed, and he moved to a higher end, SEC. Like, yeah, LSU was in a lot of, shootouts, but they still had to go up against Bama and all the tougher teams that they had to play and things like that. And he held pretty strong. So Drake, he really wanted something that was more balanced. And the only thing that really Chip wanted to change was the running back situation. He wanted it to be a lot more balanced between run and pass, because Drake wanted to save as much as he could. So a lot of people were disappointed that Drake went from, his freshman year just destroying everybody and stuff like that. But he still had, I think, he's the top 10 CFF quarterback, I want to believe. I think he was like top 6 or something like that. So he still had a great season, but he made a lot more better decisions. He was not so sloppy and things like that. Some people on the tape will nitpick and stuff like that, but Drake Maye truly was generational. I would love Sam Howell, but Sam Howell just has that fight in him to continue to want to win. So I think that's what makes Sam Howell such a good quarterback and makes him in the running to be a starting quarterback. But Drake Maye is truly, I don't say generational often, but like this isn't a Mitch Trubisky situation. This isn't, like the old school, like Marquise Williams, who really never panned out in the NFL after he left us there at UNC, or guys like Switzer at wide receiver, things like that. That just never panned out, but were excellent there at Carolina. Drake Maye truly is like, he was the heart and soul type situation. So sad to see him go, but like he's, there's a reason why he's a top prospect. He really was a game changer. So with that said, people need to temper expectations about UNC this year. Like I don't see them as like a top, 25? You probably know from the team profiles, but the win percentage, I'm pretty sure like instead of like, they had a chance to really be like a more 10-2 team, but they lost some games they weren't supposed to. Virginia, Georgia Tech. I don't know why that happens, Nick. It's just every year we play one of these teams that we're not supposed to lose to, and we just play at their level and we lose. I don't know what happens, but we play against like Duke, those teams that like the rivals where they matter the most, and we just ball out. It's just how UNC has played the past couple years, regardless of Sam or Drake. But it's just one of those things where like, I don't see just only 4 losses. Honestly, like I see it could be another 6-6. Like I feel like we can get in a bowl game. I think we're solid, but this is truly Chip Lindsey's first year. So we're going to really see what he's capable of at OC at UNC, and not ran by Drake and Mac. Now Mac is like, all right, I hired you now. Drake's gone. Let's see what you got. Here's your, quarterback transfer that you, requested. Here's your tight end that you requested. They still got Nate McCollum in the mix. I like Nate there still. I think he's another sleeper. It just really depends on what they're going to do with the tight ends and Freddie Kitchens, because Kitchens is big at the tight end position. I know there's still going to be some blocking. I think Copenhagen has graduated out, so I think he's gone. And I want to say Morales went to Boston College, which now he's under Bill O'Brien. So with that said, there's some openings in the passing. Tez has entered the draft. I love me some Tez Walker, but they exploited him a lot in the Senior Bowl. I don't know I'm sure you just like don't care once they leave college, but you're just like, it's whatever. I know you're not so much an NFL guy. However, I feel like some of your data should be used towards rookie profiles. I feel like there's a niche there where if later on, if you add more people to your data to help you with that, maybe that could pan better into the NFL side of C2C. I'm just saying there's a market there, especially with the VGR pluses and stuff like that. Of course, I wanted to get your take on Shador because he was 95 in NCAA. I was like, I don't know. I think Nick has him a little lower than 95 on the VGR plus. So, things like that. Like I'm intrigued, and I'm just like, man, Nick's data could really, I think, help the NFL side of things. So I know they're dead to you and stuff like that, but that's just the way it's gone basically at UNC. So I'd say temper expectations. Murray and Hampton is the standound, man. Like
I was going to say, we've gone this far. We haven't mentioned Murray and Hampton.
I'm saving the best for last.
Yeah, there you go.
Hampton, although he's considered slower in the NFL prospects, I don't care. You could be Braylon Allen and still you're going to get drafted high. So just like at Wisconsin there, the Dairy Raid, no more Phil Longo, but Chip Lindsey has literally established the run. Elijah Green transferred out. Caleb Hood's still there. British Brooks is now graduated. So now, and then what's his name? The other freshman, he transferred out too as well. So the one that wore 23 was just bold to wear Jordan's number. So at Carolina, Petaway. That's it.
There you go. Ended up at James Madison. Yep.
Yeah, but that's a great fit. So I mean, look at Petaway maybe later for James Madison. But now it's opened up to where we really just have Hood and we have Hampton. Hampton is going to have about 85 to 90% of that load. Hood's going to come in when Hampton needs a rest. Hampton is now being built towards like the next running back class. So they want to get him ready for the NFL because that kid was NFL ready coming into, if I'm honest with you, just how big and beastly that kid is. But that's where Chip Lindsey comes into play. He's now focused on Max Johnson, can be whatever you want to call him, the Brock Purdy, the game manager, hey, let's just throw 2,000 yards. Let's not do 4,000, 5,000 like Drake. But let's get it to our targets. Let's get to McCollum. Let's give it to Hampton. Let's throw the Johnson and Nesbitt. That's where I'm kind of seeing it going right now. And then we finally got a good couple of offensive transfers. We got the kid from Georgia and a few other ones, which I think you pointed out there in your returning production stuff. So I feel like we have a better option to keep Max Johnson in the pocket long enough to make a decent decision. And this is the ACC, so it's a step down in competition to the SEC. So that's where it's sitting at currently on the offense. Defense, I know they had to have a change. Someone had to be the scapegoat, but they got some good pieces. They did lose, what's his name? I still think we have Gray and a couple others that are still there. We still got the Butchers. So, So we still have him. So defense have got a little bit better, which was a nice thing to see. But we're still night and day. We still need to get way better at defense if Carolina really has a chance to stay ahead in games and have to play from behind, basically, is where I'm getting at. So let's temper expectations, but there is some CFF studs that we can look at on this roster. Just don't expect 5,000 Drake Maye yards from Max Johnson, or if Connor Harrell wins it, like expect more rushing yards than passing yards from Connor Harrell, whoever. Right now, it's too early to tell. The spring game will tell me who's QB1 going out first or not. If it's Max Johnson, then you'll see me tweet it out immediately. But if you're dynasty right now, I don't think we can do anything but just pretty much move around. You can do some trades, but I don't think you can accept. I think everyone else goes into the freshman supplemental. So in the supplemental this year, the guys to look at would be like a Max Johnson or Jake Johnson to get in the supplemental rounds. So if you're not so big on certain freshmen, like maybe rounds 3 through whenever 10 or something like that, and you got your top 2 freshmen like Jeremiah Smith or whoever that you're seeing in CFF Dynasty, these are the kids that you can look at and be like, all right, these can be replaceable components. Me as a Colonel Harrell owner, I'll be looking for like a Max Johnson, and grabbing him, so then I'm just good to go when it comes to UNC quarterbacks. I already have Haynes King and Dylan Gabriel, so I'm set on my starters and stuff like that. It'd be nice to own the UNC quarterback. That's kind of my tradition, regardless if I'm playing fantasy. And I'm a homer to an extent, man. So I'll shut up about UNC and let you talk for a little bit. So
no, I appreciate it. And anytime we can get somebody, as close to a program as you are, I definitely think
this is why I go to Matt Bruning about Ohio State. We'll go on and on, but honestly, I'd rather hear it from him than anybody else. Same thing. Like if it's Penn State, I want to hear from Ethan. I want to hear from Colin. I want to hear from the people closest to me. So Georgia, it's all. I'm going to you and Jared, so it's just how it is, basically.
Yeah, and I've got numbers in front of me for sure, and put in the hours to watch the games as they're happening and try to read and all that stuff. But you can't really, when you have an opportunity to talk to somebody who is as close to it as you are, you pick up a lot of the things that I'm going to miss. So definitely love that insight. Happy to have it as much as we can get. Amari and Hampton, I mean, the numbers last year were incredible. 1,500 yards on the ground, 15 touchdowns. You mentioned British Brooks moving on. Caleb Hood coming back as sort of that number 2. If, it's Max Johnson as the starting quarterback, that is on the whole a good thing for Amari and Hampton, because as you said, Connor Harrell, more of a runner, would eat into
take away
a little bit of that from Hampton. You touched on that North Carolina brought in some transfers on the offensive line. You said, you mentioned the guy from Georgia, Austin Blasky, not the highest rated, not a 5-star guy.
I'll take him. If he's from Georgia, I want him. So
sure. Yeah. And he's not the only one. I mean, they brought in Howard Sampson from North Texas, brought in Ja'Kiah Leftwich from Georgia Tech, a player by the name of Zach Greenberg from Muhlenberg. I would be lying to you to tell you I'm familiar with him, but to replace on the offensive line in a scenario like North Carolina, who we mentioned yesterday and on the CFP Winning Edge podcast, as one of those teams that has a lot to replace up front. And UNC brings back less than 20% of its O-line snaps from last season, less than 17% of its O-line starts. And North Carolina as a whole, ranks 109th in our current returning production database overall. They're 116th on the offensive side of the ball, 101st on defense, and there are a lot of big pieces to replace. So, being able to build around an Amari and Hampton is big. I think that, for CFF purposes, even though the offensive line situation numbers wise, not necessarily ideal, but seems likely that, being able to lean on Hampton is going to be good, especially early in the year as North Carolina is trying to, build some continuity up front, build this offense, settle on a quarterback, as you mentioned, and I think is a really interesting note that, this kind of we can think of maybe is a little bit more of Chip Lindsey's year 1 as offensive coordinator. Last year, a little bit more of a year 0 with Drake Maye having so much input. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, but I think that it definitely does look good for a lot of ways for Amarian Hampton. At the tight end position, I mean, there's a lot of depth there. Of course, we've talked Jake Johnson, Bryson Nesbitt. You mentioned John Copenhaver. He's also actually on the 2024 roster, so even more depth at that position. J.J. Jones is back as the leading receiver in terms of yards and receptions. Nate McCollum, who was limited at times due to injury last year, and of course Kobe Paysor. Similarly, both of those guys are back. Real quick, if you were to pick out the one UNC wide receiver you think is going to step up and have the best year, whether it's you get an opportunity to take them late in the draft or think they might be a sneaky guy to step up and really be a go-to wide receiver for Max Johnson, who's going to be the guy that you want?
If it's Cardinal Harrell, I would say J.J. Jones because they have a connection being a former second string. Now they got promoted in the bowl game, and he's the outside threat. He is the Tez Walker unless they have a springtime transfer or something like that, or someone else emerges. And they have a really good one. Chris Culliver, I was really big on. He has a good connection with Cardinal Harrell. So because Harrell's currently not in there, it's going to depend on who Max Johnson is going to. And honestly, the blanket would be Nate McCollum as far as like talent. If he's fully healthy, him and Paysor would probably be the 1A, 1B. If this was Cardinal Harrell, so if he wins the job, that's where me saying now in February, if Cardinal Harrell does get the job, it's J.J. Jones, and then you would kind of go from there. You would look at the freshmen like Hamilton, Culliver, those guys might move up in competition. But if you're looking for a blanket other than his brother and Bryson Nesbitt, I would say McCollum would probably be a good first option at wide receiver.
Excellent. Quickly on the schedule, do have Minnesota again. They open up on a Thursday night, August 29th at Huntington Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. Get Charlotte and NC Central at home, followed by James Madison. ACC play starts at Duke the last Saturday in September. Pitt, Georgia Tech are on the schedule as well. So really, quite honestly, a manageable start to the season. You mentioned, keep expectations modest, but I mean, there's no automatic loss there. And quite frankly, maybe UNC would be a slight underdog at Minnesota, but I'm not even sure that'll be the case. So much turnover at James Madison. I would expect that UNC will be favored there. So much turnover at Duke. I would expect that UNC probably going to be favored there. So a lot of winnable games early. They do have a week off before a trip to Virginia, followed by a trip to Florida State. That's probably the first guarantee. Okay, yeah, they're going to be a touchdown or more underdog at Florida State, depending on how things play out. A week off, get Wake Forest at home, a trip to Boston College November 23rd. That'll be a cold weather game most likely. And then NC State at home. So I'm with you. I understand that, the power rating number, the roster strength number, where North Carolina finished 22nd in our roster strength, and that was without Drake Maye in the bowl game, without some of the tight ends who were sitting out due to injury. So that number, it might go down a touch because of some of the turnover on the offensive line and defense. So maybe North Carolina is like 30th in roster strength once we get our final numbers. They were 26th in our power rankings at the end of last year. They were 32nd in our overall team performance ratings, 16th on the offensive side of the ball, 71st on defense, which was, as you mentioned, a little bit of a concern, but that defense did improve compared to 2022, 2021. For sure. But North Carolina, very, very interesting team. A lot of winnable games on the schedule. And, Mac Brown's recruited well, and they can lean on Amarian Hampton. Did bring in a little bit more depth at the running back position with Darwin Barlow transferring in from USC, trying to rebuild that offensive line. So a really interesting team, to be quite honest. I don't know what to think yet about North Carolina. I wonder if there'll be a little bit of a, post-hype sleeper opportunity with Drake Maye moving on. So if you had to guess right now, what would you say as far as final record?
I think they're a bowl team. So what is that? 6 wins, right? You got to have that one. So I'll say if it's going to go our way, 7-5. But honestly, I would see 6-6, to be honest, too. Like I said, I see Virginia and Georgia Tech on the schedule, and that always scares me because I don't know why, but they always have our number for some reason. So those I'm always hesitant about. Minnesota, I think, is a fair game. I think we can take Duke. NC State absolutely scares me, and so does Florida State. They're really, really good teams, regardless of change and quarterbacks and stuff like that. They just have really great just depth, basically, and just really good defenses, and that's where I can see at least 2 losses easily. So I'd say 7-5 currently, but catch me in 2 weeks, I might say 6-6, and then I don't know, after a couple games I might be like, we're going undefeated, but that's just me being stupid. So that is what it is.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your insight, Brandon. And that'll do it for us this morning on Good Morning College Football. Went a little bit longer than usual, but when we have a guest with so much insight like you do, Brandon, we can't let it go by without trying to get as much as possible. So appreciate your insight on CFF, on North Carolina. Do check out the Future Freshmen podcast and keep an eye out for those big fish and small pond situations that I know you will be first and foremost on top of for us at Campus to Canton and everywhere. So look forward to playing in a couple of our dynasty leagues together, and those other
supremacy.
absolutely. But that's it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with, it sounds like, as we were recording today, a lot of EA Sports college football stuff coming out. So I'm sure we'll spend some time on that. I want to also look at Phil Steele, one of the premier college football people, is going on a study of home field advantage. So I want to dig into that a little bit. Plus, I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more about what's going on at Georgia State. So thank you for joining us this morning for a Good Morning College Football. Do please give this video a like, subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, and try a C2C league. See what we've got going on at campustocanton.com. So thanks for joining us today, everyone. Have a wonderful Thursday, and we will see you next time.